Luke chapter 12. A number of you are really aware of this. This has been quite a place the last week. This last few days have been challenging. We had a 17-year-old young man who I baptized about a year and a half ago, who died tragically, longboarding, skateboarding. His mom is just devastated. And we had his service here Friday. And then we had Ryan's wedding. Ryan and Alexis got married. Some of you have been here and wept, and some of you have been in here and cheered and clapped, and some of you have sat quietly and contemplated. I'm glad it's a place of sanctuary. I'm glad it's a place that those things can happen. But it may seem odd to have this parable of the rich fool. Oh, great, he's going to tell me I have to give more money to church. Right? That's what I'm going to get today. And that's not what it is. The verses that precede this parable and the verses that follow it are all about fear, anxiety, and worry. Someone come up to me this morning and in tears and say, my son's wife walked out on him. I had another person call me yesterday in tears because they'd lost their job. Another person who was so excited because they had just gotten engaged. And that's life. Back and forth and up and down, enrolling students and building buildings. And sorry for the big dust ball out there. Maybe one more Sunday, we'll see. Getting ready for school, it's exciting, up and down, back and forth. So what does this money thing have to do with the big things of life, the things that matter for me in my life? And this is the thing that I think Luke did, and that Jesus dealing with it struck Luke, and he had put it in this order as it went, because in the one, Jesus says, be on your guard against the Pharisees. They're hypocrites. And he says, don't worry about them. They can't take your soul. Don't worry about them. And he says, don't you know that 5 sparrows are sold for a penny, and my Father knows about them? You're worth more than many sparrows. He says, and even if you're arrested and your life is in danger, I will give you the words you need to say. And then following this parable, Jesus says, don't worry. You worry about clothes and food. Then he talks about Solomon and all his splendor. He says, don't worry about that. God will give you that and much more. You're a treasure to him. And so he longs for him to be a treasure to you. And in the middle of this is this parable of this rich fool. Part of what Jesus is doing in this is perspective. Part of this is perspective, because the things he talks about with fear, anxiety, and worry, and those are real. You have to hold Patty Barton in your prayers, who lost her son, as the family of God. For those who hurt and are recovering, for those who've lost jobs, for those who are suffering from depression. Those are real hurts, real anxieties, real fears. They are real. How do we gain perspective on those things? And especially such things as wealth. Here's why Jesus talks. I don't know if you know this. This subject of wealth is the single most repeated topic that Jesus addresses when he talks about things that can draw us away from God. It's the one he hits over and over and over. It is so seductive. I want that stuff. Let me give you an example. Show the next one. These are first world problems. Have you seen these on the internet? These are great. Got to turn down the light. First world problems. Check it out. I rented a movie. The previous customer didn't rewind it. Now I'm dating myself there, right? Dating myself terribly. That's a first world problem. My iPhone is not the newest anymore. Poor baby. Next one. There you go. That, my friend, is a first world problem. Next one. I poured my cereal into the bowl without checking to see if we still had milk. We didn't. Crushed. Oh, you know this guy from The Office, right? First world problems? Earth is the third planet from the sun. Therefore, all problems are third world problems. Now, that's a rationalization if I've ever heard one. But then this last one is actually pretty powerful to me. So you're telling me you have fights with water and not over it? That's a third world problem. You can take them down. The question is, so here's 5 things I'm just going to share with you from this text, because in the text, Jesus is telling these things about, don't worry, God will give you the words. And out of the blue, this guy just shouts out, Rabbi, tell my brother to give me a chunk of the inheritance. And Jesus responds kind of snarky a little bit. Man, who said I could rule on this thing? Right? And then he stops and he says, watch out, everybody. You just really watch out. You hear what this guy said? We got a problem here. See, in Jewish culture, the oldest got like at least a double portion, sometimes got all the inheritance, and the younger siblings had to fend for themselves. The reason was you wanted to keep the land and the property and the business with the family. And if you cut it up into a whole bunch of pieces, the chances of it succeeding were less. So that was the idea. Oldest, boom. Pretty much got it all. And this guy goes, it ain't fair. I want my chunk of the inheritance. In fact, I think, in other words, it's kind of like if I was a rich man, and you know what Jesus' response is? You are. Here, let me share this with you if you didn't know this. So if you make minimum wage, do you think you're rich? Probably not. But if you do, worldwide, you're in the top 12.2% richest people in the world. If you make minimum wage. What if you make 25 grand a year? Now you're rolling in dough, right? Top 10%. What if you make 75,000 a year? You're in the top 1% people in the world. What if you make 6 figures? What if you make 100,000 a year? Top 0.66%. That's good enough? Far enough? Anyway. And you can, I don't know, you probably talk to me as you go out here. Let me tell you all my bills, right? Let me tell you all the things. I get it. But I think Jesus' comment to us is, you are rich. In this sermon today, there's gospel at the beginning and there's gospel at the end. This is actually a gospel point. You are rich. You guys actually fight with water and don't fight over water. You are rich. You don't worry about where your next meal comes from. Really? You are rich. You have a means to actually travel from one place to another without waiting for hours, if not days. You are rich. And so often the first words out of our mouth are ungrateful. So I think Jesus wants to give us a perspective here and say, look how rich you are. You are precious to your Father. He counts the hairs on your head and knows when the sparrow falls out of the tree, and you are worth so much more to Him than that. Look how rich we are. Second point, but Jesus says, so watch out. So watch out, beware. So let me give you an example. When I was in college, I graduated from college, and then I waited a year. I was going to work. Teresa was doing an internship as a DCE, a youth worker. And I waited, so I worked, and I needed to save up money to get married, and then we were going to go to seminary and stuff like that. So I had some jobs. I had a buddy come to me. He said, "I gotta wait. We're gonna make a fortune. We're gonna make a fortune." I said, "Great. What is it?" "We're gonna sell Amway." What did I know? So he describes it to me. We go meet with the guy. We're all jacked up. This is cool, right? Because you're actually making money off for all the other poor suckers who are doing it. It's a pyramid scheme, right? It's this pyramid scheme. And so, we're all jacked. I'm like 20, 21 years old. I'm like, great, I can make like 10 grand, 30 grand, 50 grand if this really goes well. I'll set my family up. My wife will be impressed. It'll be great. Thank God I had a friend and a colleague and a professor who got wind of what we were about to do and pulled us aside and said, watch out, right? Watch out. You know, as Americans, we don't like warning signs very much, right? Like, only off-road vehicles allowed here. Whatever. Got to have a permit to buy a gun or do this, or you got to have some labels on the tobacco, and don't tell me what to do, right? And the attitude that says warnings are mean or mean-spirited, or warnings are meant to hurt us or to take away our fun is unfortunate. Jesus gives a warning here. Is He the great party pooper in the sky? No, Jesus gives a warning. Watch out. Be on guard. Be careful here, because this is a place that can seduce you so hard that you can get pulled away from me. Paul's words in the epistle lesson that Arlen read for us are so great. Fix your eyes on things above. And so the reason I wanted to, I think that these words from Luke are appropriate even now, because Jared and Patty were here in worship at 11, and we were praying frantically, fervently for them. I'm so grateful they were here. And Ryan and Alexis' wedding, we're praying for them as they travel and they start their life together. What a juxtaposition of things, and all those things and all the things that are going on in your life can take your eyes right away. Right away from the one who loves us most, right away from the one who's longing to lead us most carefully. And it's Jesus crying out to us, watch out, because he loves us. That's a measure of Christ's love, for him to say, be careful, be cautious, think through it, don't step too quickly. This is to provide perspective. Think about it in advertising. So you get that fabulous email on the timeshare, right? Here's the email, and look, you can rent it out. You could do this, you could do that. This is awesome. And then in really fine print, you'll get this thing that says this. Or you might get one on credit cards. Oh, you got to have this credit card. And 0% trial balances, and you do this and the other thing, and then you didn't know it was 28% interest. Or, gosh, you need some money to fix your car, and you go to the check into cash or whatever it is, and little did you know it was 800% interest, amortized annually, and so forth. Warnings give us perspective, and that's a measure of God's love for us. Third thing is this. So he sets aside that guy who asked the question, and he says, be cautious. And then he moves on and tells a story. So he says there's a parable. He says there was a certain rich man, and he was super successful. Now think about this for a minute. When you see the lottery winners, right? They interview them, and when they win the lottery, $50 million, $10 million. And when they interview the lottery winners, how does that conversation go? Imagine if there was a conversation like this. Well, actually, what I did was I fed it into the supercomputer, and I crunched out a whole bunch of statistical analysis that based on this 7-Eleven on that street at this time of the day, when the Powerball got to a certain number, the likelihood of me being able to pull a certain Powerball winning nuggets, right? Do you ever hear that conversation? They don't know what they're doing. When you win the lottery, it's dumb luck. It's dumb luck to dare stand up there and say, I figured out how to do this. Okay, do it again. It's oddly enough, some people do. But anyway, the person who stands up in the lottery and says, I figured out how to do this, is a buffoon. Jesus is making a point here. Do you see what it says? What's it say? How does the parable start? Come on. The ground produced. Not the man. The ground produced. Now, we don't like that either, right? Because by the sweat of my brow, and by the brilliance of my plan, and by the risk-taking of my entrepreneurship didst I succeed. Right? And Jesus is tweaking them. Jesus is tweaking them all. He says, because he could have said, a certain man produced a great crop. That's how we'd expect to write it, but he doesn't say it that way. The ground produced. And so lest we get too cocky, lest we get too full of ourselves, one of the questions here that really this prompts, a Christian author wrote it this way, I forget who it was, but he said, in this case with my possessions, it's not how much of my possession should I give to God and acknowledge God, but how much of God's possessions should I keep for myself? So that's the third point. To remember that the ground produced. That the job you have that you're so successful at, you would have not, were it not for the mind, and the skill, the nurture, and the education, and all the things which God himself has provided, so that you might be blessed to produce. Blessed to produce. And for what purpose? And so he goes on in the parable for number 4, and then it says, he thought to himself. In the Greek, it actually says he talked to himself. Now, when you see people walking down the street talking to themselves, what do you think? Them's crazy, right? You kind of slide away a little bit. A little bit nervous about the person who's talking to himself. Jesus is making a point in here too. The man talked to himself and asked the wrong question. He came up with the wrong question. He shouldn't have just talked to himself. This is where, if we're talking about money, this is where the phrase, "a fool and his money is soon parted," is true if the only person you talk to is yourself. Because that's the counsel that you're going to get. And so Jesus is highlighting this, saying people talking to themselves are crazy. They come up with the wrong question. The question he came up with is, what shall I do? What should his question have been? What might God want me to do with his blessings? How might God want me to use this? Now, don't get me wrong on this. I am not going to stand up every night and say, "Oh, the pastor's going to hit us up for a donation now." That is not the point. God is longing for you to care for your family, to be productive, and in fact to be successful. To what end? So you could build bigger barns? This is what he's talking about. Not to build bigger barns, to impact more people, to bless more people, is the idea of what he's saying. Because they're God's possessions, so not what shall I do? What shall I do with what God has given me? What shall I do for God's work? Get good counsel. Don't just talk to yourself. That's the fourth one. And look at what happens at the end. So he builds his buildings, builds his barns, fills them up. But God said to him, "You fool." Now that's a politically incorrect statement, isn't it? So this is funny, and as we're meeting with faculty and we're talking about high school, so we're talking about grading policy and late work, and what if you're absent, right? What does that look like? You ask any teacher, right? And say, what's one of the bugaboos of your life? It's late work, right? So do we allow it a week late, a day late? Not at all. What do we do? So we came up with a plan. I think it's pretty cool. It's a balance of grace and law and gospel. We're Lutheran. But anyway, the idea that what's interesting in that is, because, and much of the conversation is, we don't want kids to be crushed, right? And parents are cautious about what we say, right, about their kids and stuff. So could you imagine Jesus coming up and going, "You fool"? Very politically incorrect. That's a grade, by the way. The guy got a grade, he flunked. He flunked it with an F for fool, because God said this very night your soul is required of you. And so he had asked the wrong question and therefore got that response from Jesus. And here, if there's something you walk away from this today, this is the thing that I find interesting. Who held the note on his barns? Do you get what I mean when I say who holds the note? Who holds the note on your car or on your home or on your vacation home or your boat? Who holds the note? Now, maybe you're blessed. Maybe you hold the note on your car. Maybe you paid it off and you got it sitting in your file. I got a couple of those sitting there, bought cars for my kids. I hold the note. But the bank holds the note on several other things of mine. The bank holds the note. But you know what Jesus is doing here? Think about it for a minute. He's saying to this man, who holds the note on your life? Who holds the note on you? And this is a good piece of word here from Jesus, because what we're discovering is God holds the note. You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? God holds the note. This is good news. Trey Smith died in a longboarding accident going down Summit at 17 years old. He landed at the door of Arlen and Yvonne Whitrock. He pounded on the doors of their neighbors. They called out people. Arlen watched the life of that young man leave his body. Chad Horst was the officer on the scene, another one of ours. It was amazing how kind of the Grace family. And off he went to the hospital. Jim shows up. I show up. Who held the note on Trey's life? This is good news, folks. And a year and a half earlier, we baptized that young man. After years of rebellion and defiance and hurt, God grabbed hold of his heart. God held the note. Folks, that's the thing, because we never know. I don't know if this is the last sermon you'll ever hear me preach, or if you'll still have to put up with me when I'm 85. You don't know. But I know this. I know who holds the note on my life. And I want you to know the same thing. And I owe him no debt. And he does not call my loan on me at any time. I am his, he is mine. And you are the same, and that's what it means, last point, to be rich towards God. You want to know what it means to be rich? Doesn't that a weird phrase? Jesus says this is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself but is not rich towards God. What do you mean rich? It's like how do you buy stuff for God? It's the guy who has everything. What does that mean? God doesn't need your money, right? God doesn't need God has glory and riches all unto himself. Doesn't need what you got to give him, the paltry little thing I give him. So what does it mean to be rich toward God? And I'll tell you what it means. It means to realize how rich he is. Here's my point. I think Jesus uses this odd phrase, the only place it's used in all of Scripture. It's how I'll be with you unless you are rich towards God. Because I think he wants you to take a double take and say, but wait a minute. God is rich. And that's the gospel. For God has been rich towards you. He has welcomed you into his family. He makes your heart beat and your lungs swell. He gives you joy in work and in play. He puts your family. How is it so interesting in our lives that when things go wrong, we think about all the things that have gone wrong and none of the things that have gone right? And how God has been rich towards us and welcomed us into his presence and assures our future and our presence. God is simply longing for us to know how rich he has been towards us. And when we truly know that, embrace that, how can we be anything else but rich toward him? To the things which God loves, the things which God longs to do, with gratitude, with praise, and with thanksgiving. God is rich to you. May we be rich toward God. Amen.